a quiet morning in an exclusive country club on the outskirts of Buenos Aires. Green fairways, big houses hidden behind trees and walls, security guards at the entrance, gardeners trimming hedges, children riding bikes. It all looked safe, controlled, almost perfect. But in August of 2015, behind the door of one of those houses, a story of years of fear, control, and violence reached its brutal end. A successful businessman, a respected professional woman, 3 children, lawyers, a mother, and in the middle of it all, a crime that would become one of the most shocking femicides in Argentina. This was the story of Claudia Schaefer and Fernando. On paper, they were the kind of couple people envied. He moved in the glamorous world of perfumes and luxury brands. She balanced a serious corporate job with motherhood and a growing family business. They lived between an elegant apartment in the city and a rented house in Martindale Country Club, a place usually associated with comfort, privacy, and money. The case forced an entire country to look again at something uncomfortable. Violence inside the home did not respect social class, education, or postcode. It could live behind polished gates and manicured gardens just as easily as anywhere else. And in Claudia's case, that violence ended in a locked dressing room in the middle of the day, while lawyers and a 70-something woman begged on the other side of the door. To understand how that moment happened, we need to go back not only to the day of the crime, but to Claudia's life and to the man who ended it. Claudia Schaefer was 44 years old when she died. She had been a daughter, a sister, a friend, a professional, and above all, a mother of 3. Public information about her childhood was limited, partly because her family tried to protect her privacy even after her death. But some things became clear from the way people talked about her later. She had been born in Argentina in the early 1970s. She grew up in a country that moved between political instability, economic crisis, and moments of hope. While the news showed big changes, Claudia's daily life seemed more ordinary. School, family routines, friendships, small dreams about what she wanted to be when she grew up. Those who worked with her years later described a woman who was organized, responsible, and warm. That personality did not appear overnight. It came from years of learning to adapt, to study, to meet expectations, and at the same time, to keep a personal kindness that people noticed and remembered. She studied business administration. Choosing that path said a lot. It was a practical career focused on numbers and management, but it also opened doors to a wide professional world. In university, she learned about companies, finance, and strategy, but she also built relationships and networks that later helped her career. As a young adult, Claudia started to move through the corporate world. She took jobs where she could grow, learn, and show what she could do. At some point, she joined Bodega Salentín, a respected winery, and worked her way up to become the secretary to the board. That role demanded reliability, discretion, and attention to detail. She handled meetings, documents, and sensitive information. People at the company later remembered her as competent and steady, someone who did her job without drama and treated colleagues with respect. At the same time, her personal life advanced. She formed a couple with Fernando, a man who, like her, had ambitions and plans. Together, they would later become partners in a cosmetics distribution company called Global 5. They combined her experience and his contacts in the beauty industry to build something of their own. Once she became a mother, Claudia's life changed again. She gave birth to 3 children over the years, and those children became the center of her world. Friends and family described her as a very dedicated mother. She helped with homework, took them to activities, organized birthdays, and tried to give them stability even when the marriage started to crack. From the outside, her life seemed like a balance of responsibilities. During the day, she could be in a meeting at the winery or dealing with the family business. By afternoon and night, she focused on her children, family events, and the usual chaos of everyday life. She smiled in photos, went on trips, and tried to keep the family together. But as we now know, that image hid a slow and dangerous transformation taking place inside the home. To understand the dynamic between them, we also need to look at who Fernando Farr had been before he became known as a murderer. Fernando Gustavo Farr was around 52 years old in 2015. He grew up in Argentina and followed a traditional path for someone who wanted status in the business world. He studied at the Universidad Católica, Argentina, and graduated as a public accountant and business administrator. He did very well academically and later went on to complete an MBA at Thunderbird School of Global Management in the United States. That education opened doors. Over the years, he built a long resume in marketing, retail, and especially in the cosmetics and perfume industry. He worked for major companies, Carrefour in retail, a bank where he focused on retail banking, marketing, Coca-Cola, where he handled market development. Later, he moved to the beauty sector and joined L'Oreal, working his way up to marketing director for luxury products. There, he dealt with famous brands and international campaigns. He did not stop there. He had a stint in wine promotion and then became director of exclusive fragrances for Latin America and Avon. In 2010, he reached one of the high points of his career when he became general manager at Coty for Argentina, Chile, and Uruguay. That company handled prestige perfumes and cosmetics, and his job brought him into contact with celebrities, fashion events, and first-class travel. People who later talked about him described a man who enjoyed that glamorous life. He took photos with famous faces, loved business-class flights, and liked being seen as a successful executive. For him, professional prestige seemed deeply tied to his identity. In 2006, he and Claudia founded Global 5, a distribution company for cosmetics and perfumery. It allowed them to run something in their own name while he still held corporate positions. On paper, they looked like a powerful couple, educated, successful, with a foot in both multinational corporations and entrepreneurship. Over time, though, cracks appeared. A few months before the crime, Coty removed him from his position. He received a large severance package, but the loss of status hit him hard. Without that title, without that office and that team, he felt exposed and humiliated. He started psychiatric treatment for depression, anxiety, and panic attacks. Those treatments included medication. While he focused more on Global 5, the imbalance at home grew. The pressure of his ego, his need for control, and his fear of losing money and image mixed into something toxic. That toxicity did not only affect him, it spread over Claudia and the children. When Claudia and Fernando had started their relationship, they were two young professionals with plans and energy. They fell in love, built a home, and had 3 children. They moved into an apartment in an upscale neighborhood of Buenos Aires, and later rented a house in Martindale Country Club in Perel. Their life included trips, social events, and access to good schools. For a long time, friends and acquaintances saw them as a normal upper-middle-class or upper-class family. There were arguments, of course, but many couples argued. It was easy to ignore warning signs from the outside. The problem was what happened inside when the doors closed and the visitors left. Domestic workers, who later testified in court, described a pattern that repeated itself. Fernando raised his voice frequently. He insulted Claudia, undermined her, and used humiliating language. Sometimes he directed his anger at the children too. The atmosphere in the house became tense and unpredictable. Claudia felt those attacks not just as isolated episodes, but as a constant pressure. She started recording some of the conversations on her phone. In those recordings, later heard by the jury, Fernando's voice came through as controlling, aggressive, and demeaning. Claudia's responses showed someone trying to maintain some dignity and protect the children in the middle of verbal storms. The violence was not only psychological, there were incidents of physical aggression. On at least one occasion in front of the children, things escalated to a point where Claudia felt compelled to seek formal help. She went to the Office of Domestic Violence, an institution of the Supreme Court, and made a complaint. As these conflicts accumulated, Claudia's fear grew. She started to tell people close to her that she was afraid of what he might do. According to those later accounts, she believed he might kill her. Those words at the time sounded dramatic, even exaggerated. After all, they lived in a secure neighborhood, had money and lawyers. But her intuition was tragically accurate. Eventually, she decided to leave the Martindale house with the children and move to the apartment in the city. She obtained an exclusion order that forced Fernando to leave the marital home and later a restraining order that limited his contact. The couple began formal divorce proceedings and negotiations over assets. For Fernando, this separation was a severe blow. He saw his family structure change, his job disappear, and the possibility of losing property and money through the divorce. Instead of accepting responsibility, he focused on control. He insisted on keeping certain properties, on having access to the children, and on controlling how the separation would look socially. The restraining order eventually expired just days before the crime. Claudia, however, still felt afraid. She tried to manage contact with him through lawyers and supervised meetings. She did not want to completely cut him off from the children, but she also did not want to put herself at risk. It was a delicate balance, and in August 2015, that balance collapsed. In the weeks before the crime, the divorce negotiations intensified. The couple, through their lawyers, discussed what would happen with the Martindale house, with the apartment, with Global 5, with other assets. These were not only numbers on paper. For Fernando, they touched his pride and his idea of success. For Claudia, they represented safety for her and her children. Fernando continued under psychiatric treatment and medication. He spent time at the Martindale house, sometimes alone, sometimes visited by his parents. His mother, in her 70s, worried about him, but also remained loyal. His father and brother also moved around him, part of a family network that often protected rather than confronted him. Claudia kept working, caring for the children and trying to move forward. She remained in contact with her sister and parents, who supported her emotionally and practically. In those conversations, she expressed a mix of determination and anxiety. She wanted the divorce to be finished. She wanted to rebuild her life and create a more peaceful environment for her kids. But she also felt that Fernando was capable of anything. Around 3 days before the crime, nothing publicly extraordinary appeared in her schedule. She followed her routine: work, children, meetings with lawyers, domestic tasks. This normality made what came next even more shocking. A practical issue remained unresolved. Claudia still had belongings in the Martindale house: clothes, personal items, things she needed. To solve that problem, the lawyers organized a visit. The idea was simple on the surface. On a certain day, both would be present at the house together with their lawyers. Claudia would pack her things and leave with them. This structure was meant to keep the situation calm and safe. The date chosen was August 21st, 2015. No one present that morning imagined that the meeting would end in tragedy within minutes. It was late morning when Claudia arrived at Martindale. With her came her lawyer. Fernando was already there. His own lawyer came as well, and his mother was present too. The presence of the older woman and two legal professionals should have created a protective framework. The atmosphere was tense, but outwardly polite. Everyone knew there were conflicts, but they were there to solve a practical issue. They entered the house together. The lawyers and Fernando's mother stayed in the kitchen area, where they talked and drank coffee. They tried to keep things calm to avoid arguments. Claudia moved through the house toward the walk-in closet or dressing room where many of her clothes were kept. At some point, Fernando followed her. They entered the dressing room together. He closed the door and locked it with a key. From that moment on, what happened inside remained known only through physical evidence and the sounds heard by those on the other side. Inside that small space, years of control, fear, and rage exploded in a few minutes of extreme violence. Fernando had taken 2 kitchen knives from a block earlier. According to the prosecution's reconstruction, he either hid them or carried them in a way that Claudia did not immediately notice. Once alone with her, he attacked. Claudia tried to defend herself. She managed to land at least 1 punch on him, leaving evidence that she had fought back. But she was trapped in a confined room with a man stronger than her, armed with 2 knives and overflowing with anger. From the kitchen, the lawyers and his mother first heard raised voices, then screams. Claudia cried for help. Fernando's mother realized something terrible was happening and rushed to the door. She begged her son to stop, to think about what he was doing. On the other side, the lawyers tried to force the door open, managing to break the handle, but not the lock. Realizing they could not enter, they ran outside to the patio and tried to see through a barred window that opened from the dressing room. One of them managed to glimpse inside. He would later describe seeing Fernando over Claudia's body, moving his arm in a stabbing motion. The attack left Claudia with dozens of wounds, mostly in the neck, back, and torso. Different reports later mentioned between 66 and more than 70 stab and cut injuries. One of the knives bent from the force applied. The pathologist who examined her body later described a frenzy of violence, more than enough to cause death. The entire chain of events, from the moment Claudia entered the house to the moment she laid dead on the dressing room floor, lasted around 8 minutes. It was fast, brutal, and irreversible. After the attack, the people in the house called the emergency number. The call went through at around 11:39 in the morning. Security staff at the country club and local police responded. When officers arrived, they found a scene that contrasted sharply with the peaceful surroundings of the gated community. Inside the dressing room lay Claudia's body, surrounded by blood. At that point, nothing more could be done for her. The paramedics and officers confirmed that she had died. In another part of the house, they found Fernando. He was covered in blood, sitting or lying on a bed or sofa, not attempting to escape. He was detained on the spot. Images later circulated of him on the floor, handcuffed, with a blank expression. Police secured the scene. Forensic specialists came in to photograph, collect the knives, take samples, and reconstruct what had happened. They observed the broken door handle, the locked dressing room, the position of the body, the blood patterns, and the injuries. All of this would later feed into the official investigation. From the beginning, investigators considered the case as a suspected femicide. That term referred to the killing of a woman in a context of gender-based violence. The relationship between them, the prior complaints, the brutality of the attack in the setting, all pointed in that direction. In the days and months that followed, prosecutors built their case. They interviewed witnesses, The lawyers who had been in the house described what they heard and saw that morning. They explained the arrangement for Claudia to pick up her belongings, the initial calm, the sudden escalation, and their desperate attempts to open the door or see through the window. Fernando's mother also gave her version. She had been present, had heard her son and Claudia, and had begged him not to continue. Later, in some media appearances, she tried to soften her son's responsibility, suggesting that Claudia had provoked him or that she had grabbed a knife first. The courts, however, focused on evidence rather than family narratives. Domestic workers who had worked in the house over the years spoke about the climate inside the home. They described repeated episodes of shouting, insults, and aggression from Fernando toward Claudia, and sometimes toward the children. Their testimonies helped show that the crime did not appear out of nowhere. It fit into a long pattern. Prosecutors also used recordings that Claudia herself had made before her death. In those audios, Fernando could be heard attacking her verbally, controlling and degrading her. She recorded these moments as evidence and perhaps as a way to make her reality visible to someone outside the house. Medical and forensic professionals examined the body, the knives, and the scene. They counted the wounds, analyzed their depth and direction, and determined cause and time of death. They studied whether there were defensive wounds on Claudia's hands and arms, which would indicate that she had tried to protect herself. They found more than enough proof of defensive injuries. Investigators also collected information about Fernando's mental health treatment. He had seen psychiatrists and taken medication. The question was whether his condition at the time of the crime could excuse or reduce his responsibility. From this investigation came a clear line from the prosecutors. They concluded that Fernando knew exactly what he was doing, that he had control over his actions, and that he had decided to kill Claudia in a context of dominance and gender violence. There was no mystery about who had physically killed Claudia. Fernando had been the only person alone with her in the locked dressing room. He had blood on his body and clothes. The knives came from the house where he lived. The lawyers had seen him attacking her through the window. But in court, the question was not only whether he did it, but how the law would interpret his mental state and intent. Fernando's defense built a narrative around emotional breakdown and altered consciousness. They argued that he suffered from a serious disturbance due to depression, anxiety, and medication. According to this version, the combination of job loss, divorce, economic worries, and the stress of the meeting had pushed him into an unstable state where he no longer fully controlled himself. They suggested that the episode had been a kind of explosion, not a planned killing. They tried to frame it under the legal concept of violent emotion, which in Argentine law could reduce a sentence if accepted. They also raised the idea that he had been over-medicated and that his mind had not been clear. Prosecutors rejected that interpretation. They pointed to the sequence of actions. He took 2 knives from the kitchen. He followed her into a small room and locked the door. He targeted vital areas of her body again and again. He continued for long enough to cause massive injuries. From their perspective, these actions showed purpose and intent, not a temporary blackout. The investigation moved forward with the main charge of homicide, doubly aggravated. One aggravating factor was the marital bond. The other was gender violence, the femicide element. Under the law, this combination carried a life sentence. The case went to trial in 2017 in the province of Buenos Aires. It was heard by a criminal court in Santa Cruz using a jury system. 12 citizens, 6 men and 6 women, were selected to listen to the evidence and decide if Fernando was guilty or not. The courtroom brought together all the main actors. On one side, Fernando and his defense team. On the other, the prosecutors and the lawyers representing Claudia's family. In the audience sat journalists, activists against gender violence, and members of both families. During the trial, prosecutors presented the narrative they had built over nearly 2 years. They began with the history of the relationship, the domestic violence, the recordings, the testimony of domestic workers and relatives. They described Claudia's attempts to seek help, the restraining order, and her fear that he might kill her. They then moved to the events of the day of the crime, using the witnesses from inside the house, the forensic reports, and the physical evidence. One by one, witnesses came to the stand. Domestic workers described how the atmosphere in the house had changed over the years, becoming heavier and more threatening. Claudia's relatives spoke about her fear and her plans for a life after the divorce. Forensic experts detailed the injuries and explained how they reflected a prolonged and intense attack. The defense presented its own experts. Psychiatrists explained Fernando's diagnosis, his treatment, and the possible effects of his medication. They aimed to show that on that day, he had acted under an extreme emotional disturbance, without the full capacity to understand or control his actions. Throughout the trial, Claudia herself was present only through memories and recordings. The jury heard her voice on audio, standing up for herself, reacting to insults, trying to set boundaries. Listening to those recordings, they could sense not just the final tragedy, but the everyday violence that had preceded it. After several days of testimony, arguments, and legal instructions, the jury retired to deliberate. They had to decide whether they accepted the prosecution's view of a conscious, aggravated femicide, or whether they believed the defense's claim of emotional or mental disturbance. The jury returned with a unanimous verdict. They found Fernando guilty of homicide, aggravated by the bond and by gender violence. In other words, guilty of femicide. The judges then imposed the only sentence that the law allowed for that crime at that time, life imprisonment. The court also took an additional step. It removed his parental authority over his 3 children. This meant that legally, he no longer had rights over them as a father. For Claudia's family, the verdict did not bring her back, but it did bring a measure of justice. Her sister, parents, and children could at least know that the system had recognized the seriousness of what had been done to her. The story did not end with the sentence. Fernando's lawyers appealed. They argued again that his mental state had not been properly considered, and that the sentence was excessive. The appeals went through higher courts. The Provincial Chamber of Cassation confirmed the conviction. Later, further appeals were rejected. By around 2022, the life sentence was effectively firm. Legal experts estimated that he would only be able to request conditional release many decades later, when he would be elderly. In the prison system of Buenos Aires province, Fernando did not stay in one place. He passed through several units over the years. Prisons in San Martín, Dolores, La Plata, Azul, Olmos, General Alvear, Bahía Blanca, and others appeared in reports. At times he had conflicts with other inmates. At other times, he asked to be moved for security reasons. Journalists who interviewed him in prison described a man who accepted some responsibility, but tended to minimize it, focusing on his own suffering and the supposed effect of medication. He described his routines behind bars, from drinking mate and playing chess, to taking courses in computing, home maintenance, or bakery. He received visits from his parents and a few friends. Meanwhile, Claudia's children grew up under the care of her family. They stayed mostly away from the public eye. Reports suggested that they cut off all contact with their father. They built a new life, trying to move forward while carrying a history that could not simply disappear. Claudia's relatives, especially her sister, continued to remember her as a loving mother and a hard-working woman who had tried to escape a violent relationship and had paid with her life. In the memory of Claudia Schaefer and of so many other women lost to femicide, the hope remained that each story told could help someone recognize danger sooner, support a friend in need, or demand better protections from authorities.